George Washington. George Washington played an important part in the French and Indian War. He was a messenger who brought messages from the colonies to the French. Later, after the French and Indian Wars, the colonies felt like they had rights, and they felt like this the whole time. They felt like that they had rights that others didn't have. They thought they would have these rights forever, and then Parliament started passing laws. The colonies felt these were threatening their rights. The reason Britain brought on these taxes was the 7 Years' War put them in debt. British leaders thought the colonies should help pay off the debt. So they started passing laws that they wanted to take in more money with. That's why they made high taxes. But this made the colonies angry. Angry colonists started organizing boycotts. On March 5th, which is my birthday, Parliament repelled most acts except for the tea tax. Later on March 5th, a crowd surrounded a group of soldiers and threw things at them. 5 patriots died from this incident. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732. He died on December 14, 1779.
George Washington was born on 1732, February 22nd, in Virginia.
In 1749, as a young man, George Washington got a job as a surveyor surveying the land.
His knowledge in surveying would later help him as a general.
In 1753, he took a British ultimatum in the French and Indian War as a threat to the French.
In 1754, he surrenders to Fort Necessity on July 3, 1754, to the French and Indians under Louis Coulon de Villiers. The surrender of Fort Necessity was Colonel Washington's only surrender.
In 1755, General Braddock went on an expedition and George Washington went as a volunteer commander. They crossed a river and the French and Indians attacked their group, and the British were winning, but the French shot General Braddock. In
1759, he was married to Martha Dandridge Curtis, and they started to work together with the plantations.
In 1774, with unhappy colonists who were disobeying the rule of the king and rebelling against it, George Washington was elected into the First Continental Congress.
The following year, he was elected to the Second Continental Congress.
In 1775, he was elected to the commander of the Continental Army.
One of his first acts of the Continental Army was he broke the siege of Boston in 1776.
That same year, on July 4th, the Declaration of Independence was signed.
Later that year, they were forced out of Brooklyn, New York, and New Jersey.
One of Washington's most famous appearances was at the Delaware River. Christmas Eve, and it was a long, hard winter, and they were slaughtered battle after battle, and it was really a hard time. They didn't have very much.
Have anything like any survival gear or anything like that?
Yeah, they didn't have like flashlights or survival gear, so it was hard for them to see. And Continental Congress wasn't paying to help the Army. They weren't paying for ammo or anything. So after this long year where they're getting slaughtered battle after battle, they cross a river with humongous ice chunks in rowboats so they can get to an enemy British camp.
After crossing the Delaware River, they had victories at the Trenton, and they had many more victories.
The following year was not any better. Washington lost Philadelphia to General Howe. This was a big loss because Philadelphia was the capital of the colonies at the time.
Valley Forge was the colonist base, and it was very wet, damp, and cramped. That winter, they had to stay at Valley Forge with very little. Food and survival gear.
Martha Washington and other wives of soldiers also went there and helped the soldiers.
Because George Washington knew the British were nearby, he prohibited card playing and dancing.
That same winter, the colonies were training for battle. After Valley Forge, the colonies had many more victories. That same year, the French were also inspired to join the colonies. Between colonial winnings on the battlefield and French winnings at sea, they were able to finish up the revolution at Yorktown.
In 1787, they decided to write a new constitution because the form of the government was not working, and George Washington was elected as constitutional president.
In 1789, George Washington was elected president. There was no need of a campaign because every electoral vote was for him. That is the only time in history that a president has received 100% of the vote.
The oath of office was taken in Federal Hall in New York City. New York City was the capital at the time.
In 1790, George Washington approved plans and found the area for the U.S. Capitol.
He also laid the cornerstone for the Capitol.
In 1793, he was elected president for the second time.
In 1793, he signed the Proclamation of Neutrality, which was a formal announcement issued by the United States President George Washington. Declaring the nation neutral in conflict between France and Great Britain.
In 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion happened. It was based on a tax that Alexander Hamilton placed. He was in charge of the Treasury of the United States, and he was trying to pay off the debt.
Washington wrote with troops, and the rebellion fell apart.
In 1795, the Jay Treaty was signed. This was a treaty that kept the colonies from getting into another war with Britain.
It was strongly supported by Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, and John Jay.
He was trying to make sure the presidency did not fall apart. Martha Washington felt it was her duty to have a reception and dinner party every week and be the host of them, so she had them in the presidential mansion.
In 1796, he refused a third term.
He retired to his plantation and in 1799 died of pneumonia.